Right, we're ready to rock and roll. Welcome to my first guest, Kate Frobisher.
Hello.
Hi. Now, for listeners who don't know, you're, of course, a dear friend of mine, in inverted commas, going on 12 long years now. But you are, more importantly, a successful entrepreneur, or as you like to call yourself in hashtags, a boss bitch.
Correct.
So you started your own business in 2015, a cafe in West London called Pantry. And I'm not being biased, it remains my favourite brunch place ever. So that has been super successful for you, which you've actually recently sold it to another fab entrepreneur, Crystal. So congratulations to you both.
Thank you very much.
So I'm interested today, Kate, really to hear about the early days of P, which is what we call it. Could you tell me a little bit about how you found the experience in the first place? I guess in particular, those very early initial stages of setting up a business like this.
So I was actually really young and stupid and naive when I set the business up. It all sprung from an idea when I was living in New Zealand, why the cafes in Australia and New Zealand are way better than we were used to at the time in London and England in general. So I had the idea of quite a small takeaway business, and then when I found a premise, I fell in love with it. The idea kind of spiraled out of control and ended up being a 42-seater brunch restaurant. So it was always going to be a massive learning curve, but it was even bigger than I ever anticipated, because I had 9 members of staff as soon as we opened. I'd never managed people before. I'd never been in charge of people before. My experience in hospitality was actually really limited as well. But what I did have was a really strong vision, and I trained at chef school as well, at Leeds School of Food and Wine. So I used knowledge from that and some of the hospitality experience that I had. But in general, it was a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of brave faces, a lot of lying as well. In the beginning, I didn't really want anyone to know that I've had very little experience. And it was really, for me, very much a case of fake it till you make it. And I've always been a really confident person, which was so helpful, because there were so many times when I came home and I just thought, God, why have I done this? I don't know what I'm doing. And then slowly and surely I just began to feel really confident, and I knew that something must have been working, because people kept coming back and we had really good reviews right from the start, kind of. But obviously there were bad ones too. I'm not saying it was all great.
Yeah, of course. And that's interesting what you say about sort of the brave face culture. And I guess behind closed doors, you were finding things quite overwhelming. And when you did go on to sell the cafe, I think you opened up quite a lot to your customers, to your fans, I guess, to people that really respected you, about just how difficult those early stages were. But even to us, even to your friends, I think you held quite a sort of strong front facing face at those times. So I guess overall, what were some of those biggest challenges for you?
Financially was always a really big thing for me, actually. And I didn't even know that things like crowdfunding existed. And it wasn't actually until you started working in it that I even knew that was an option. So I had really limited funds in the beginning. And I was fortunate enough that I had some money from inheritance. I borrowed some from family. And the pot was very, very small, which meant that I got really stressed out about money, and it wasn't making any for the first at least year and a half, and then only just breaking even until about the 3.5 year. So I really struggled with the financial side of things, because again, some of it was my inexperience, and some of it was just the fact that restaurants are a ridiculously hard industry to make money in. And I just thought, God, what have I done, and why is this the right thing, and why have I done this? And I was living a very different life to most of my other kind of young 20s friends, because I felt like I had the weight of such a responsibility on my shoulders to pay back the people who'd lent me money.
And not a salary for yourself as well.
Yeah, no, my salary, I didn't tell anyone this, and I've only recently told my staff this. I was the lowest paid employee, even including the weekend 17-year-olds who would come in for 6 hours each day. When I did the payroll at the end of every month, I was paid less than everyone else. But I was really fortunate enough to have a family who lived locally. So I was living with my parents, and they they were really generous with buying me things, because otherwise I don't know what I would have done. And
Wardrobes.
exactly.
But you need that, I think, with any business, I guess, is that network and that support from the people you know
100%.
when you
That's
don't
actually
have.
something that I have recommended to people so much since then, because a friend of mine mentioned that she wanted to set something up. She wanted to go abroad and set something up. And I said, okay, but cool, but who do you know there? Like, are they going to, like, small things, like my car needed an MOT, but I didn't have a day off for 6.5 months. So I couldn't get my car, but I needed, it was just things like that may not be anything to do with the actual business, but the support of people around you is so important. And just, if you know a friend who set up something, no matter how big or small, even just a small, like, oh, I'll come over and here's a lasagna, or do you need me to your car to be cleaned? I really recommend trying to do things like that, because people like me, like you said, I do always try and, I guess, put on a tough face, but there are sometimes you just think, yeah, I'd bloody love that if you could do that.
Yeah. And
Just
just
around
learn,
the
I guess,
subject.
to let some things go and let some things happen, and rely on people and say, actually, today I do really need some support. And I mean, I remember, in fact, this never really changed. You've managed to have some pretty nice holidays, but you have, for the most part, been working 7-day weeks for quite a long time up until you sold the business. Do you think that that is because, I guess, this was your baby, and I know that you hired some amazing staff, and lucky enough to know some of them myself, but I guess you were constantly thinking about it. It was always on your mind. And do you think that going into another business in the future that you'll be able to think, actually, I'm going to really embrace this time off and trust other people to do things for you, and I guess not for you, but on behalf of the business?
I think it is a natural progression as you get bigger companies, and then you can pay people more. So then you trust them a lot more. I know that might not sound like the right thing to say, but in the beginning, I had very much people who they weren't particularly experienced. They were kind of young kids from the local area. This was working front of house. So I wouldn't really have left them by themselves. But then as we grew and as we developed, I had staff that I did feel really comfortable leaving there alone. And I think personality wise, for me, I will always struggle to switch off completely. And I've talked to some people that I know, like even on the road where my cafe was, that they had other businesses, and they just thought, God, what you want about? They didn't have that feeling. So I think it's a personality thing, definitely.
Okay.
But also, like, I know people that will go into their cafe and sit down and drink coffee all day. I can't sit down, and I could never sit down and have a meal in mine, because all I'm doing is looking around and thinking, that person's been waiting too long for their order. That food's sitting on a cart waiting to be taken out. Exactly. I didn't feel like I was a very good, if friends of mine came in, I wasn't a very good guest, because I've got, my ears were just on such pinpricks listening out for everything. So that's not the same to be said for everyone. There's no way that everyone will feel that similar way, but I think it's definitely in my personality type. And also, I think that the better staff you have, obviously with any business, the more you feel like you can trust them. But the thing is, the buck stops with you. You get the praise, you get the money if there is any, you get the the kudos, and the drawback of that is having to take responsibility. If someone's off sick, at the end of the day, it's going to be you who has to figure it out.
Yeah, of course. And again, got the luxury of knowing this journey on your behalf very well. And I remember being away with you on weekends. You finally managed to take 2 days off, and then on the Sunday morning at 6 a.m. you'd up and leave because someone had texted you and said, can't go in today, Kate. Probably a bit hungover, but they told you they were very unwell. And actually just seeing that element of stress, I imagine, was quite difficult to deal with when all your friends are sort of in, I guess, very different businesses. Which kind of leads me into another question, and I almost hate asking this, especially with the year that we're in, but do you think that being a female business owner has had any impact on how you've run the business, or how you've reacted to people, or how people have responded to you, maybe?
I do think about that quite often. And I actually, honestly, for me, the answer, I don't feel that at all. And I was reading something the other day, and I don't feel that I've been, I don't feel like I've been looked down upon as a woman. And someone said, it was Prue Leith on her in an interview with her, and she said, I have never felt the glass ceiling because I've always been in charge. And I think that's how I feel when I speak to friends of mine who are in corporate roles and they mention that someone's talked, you know, a man's talked over them in a meeting, or they've been disregarded for promotions because they're in pregnancy age. I've never had that feeling, and I've never been aware of it. The only discrimination I would say I felt was more of an age thing. Because
Okay.
I was 24, and it was very much in the beginning, if people said, who owns this, and I said, it was always who's the owner. And even from staff, sometimes I was male staff, actually. Sometimes if I was interviewing them, they would say, who's the owner, and I said, well, me. But maybe that's rather less discrimination and more just a surprise thingy rather than.
Yeah, perhaps. But I guess as well that might have led, do you feel like that has led staff that were older than you to think, I don't want to work for somebody that's younger than me?
I'm not sure either with that, because I also think that if you're the type of person that can't see where you can learn different things from, then I didn't really want people like that working with me in general. And I've had people older than me, younger than me. I've had 16-year-olds that I've learned things from. I've had, you know, people a lot older than me who maybe haven't got their career path to where they've wanted to be, and we've managed to work well together. I've always liked open-minded people, and one of the advice that I've given the new owners of Urban Pantry is never ever hire out of desperation. And I did that. I made that mistake in the past of thinking, oh my god, I need someone now, and hired someone that I knew I didn't really like. And I knew that I could feel it at the time, but I just thought we need them. And actually I made myself work so many in all the different positions in the cafe. You know, I could be the head chef down to the kitchen porter. It took a couple of years to be able to do everything well myself, especially because I went to chef school but then didn't work in any kitchens, and it's a completely different thing being a home cook and working in a restaurant kitchen. So I worked really hard at getting myself up to the same standards as the chefs. So it meant that I never had to hire anyone that I didn't want to, because if someone left, regardless of their position, I'm just going to go and fill that. And yeah, it might mean that I miss a holiday or that I work 7 days, but at least it means that my team are great all the time.
Yeah.
And actually I've managed to, I maintain really, really good levels of staff retention, more than most hospitality places, because I really regarded the team well. But that didn't happen from the beginning, definitely not. There was a lot of desperation hires of people didn't turn up for their first shifts, people walked out mid-shift, you know, it's all gone on. But that's the lesson that I've definitely learned along the way, is just be self-sufficient as much as possible, and then you wait for your right person.
Yeah, that's really good advice, I think. And again, I guess I can kind of link it to a way in which we work, which is one of the things you mentioned was you learned a lot from staff that were younger than you, older than you, very different to you, wanting different things. You know, they might have joined BP for a part-time job. They might have joined it because that's what they wanted to do forever, but you learned as much from them as they learned from you. And one of the things that we work with our clients on is that, you know, feedback is invaluable, and you want to be able to trust that the feedback that you're getting and the feedback that you're giving people is, you know, very authentic and actually got the business's best interest at heart, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I'd never be too arrogant to get feedback. Sometimes even if you don't want it.
Yeah, and some interesting reviews on
Pesky Google review.
Yeah, the salt wasn't on the left-hand side of the table. I remember back in the very sort of early days of RBP being, you know, really, really proud, but also just absolutely in awe of how you could do it. But at the same time, I was thinking, God, what a fun job. I wish that I would do something like this. And you would always come back to me with, you know, India, don't be too sort of high and mighty about that. I've just spent 14 days organizing sanitary bins, which at the time was obviously a real, you know, bring me back down to earth. But what would you say have been some of your biggest highs in your sort of 6.5 years of
just over 6 years? Yeah. It's one of those difficult ones, because just like we were saying before, just before this, when we had our own private call, I think it's really hard to remember the bad times when you're having a really good time. So as I said, as soon as I started making money from it, it's kind of been smooth sailing from there, and I've been able to live a much more normal life just like anyone else. So what I had was the perks of a really fun job, which you're right, it is really fun. The perks of being completely in charge of my own day and hours and everything like that. And also I had the financial perks of it too, which I didn't have before. Yeah. So it was really difficult for me to remember back to those days of just being like, oh my God, you know, I would do the first year, I was doing about 95 hours a week. And I worked out my wage was like 0. I think not, I don't know, maybe 9p. I can't remember, something ridiculous an hour, but in the pennies, You
couldn't even buy penny sweets with it, put it that way.
I know. But then what is great is when I started getting some, you know, as you said, some really good highs. We won a few awards in the first year. So I think a lot of people in small businesses, and I know you guys work closely with small businesses, will know that most of the time it's kind of a labor of love rather than you going into it to go and make your millions. So things like awards really mean so much because you've put your everything into a product, and that means that other people are starting to realize it.
Yeah, the recognition.
Definitely. So I think those first awards that I won were just absolutely amazing. And then there was some more later on, which they kind of got more and more interesting, which was always great. You know, National Breakfast Awards, we were the winner of that, and I loved that. And then also just another real high is looking for I think it was the year 4 at the end of year accounts, and it showed like a plus, you know, quite a big plus. And I was like, this is great. I mean, it's taken
I've made it.
It's taken a long time to get there, but I finally get there. And I would also say to anyone in small businesses, a lot of these awards you have to apply, you have to enter yourselves in. So do that, because you know they're not going to come to you, but definitely do that, because even though you enter yourself, the fact that people vote for you or people find you, it really does make you feel like, yeah, I've done something.
Yeah. I mean, a high for me on your behalf was when you started serving alcohol with the brunches. That was a real high thing. But even getting to that stage was difficult for you, because you had a lot of pushback.
For someone else, you just think, great, I can buy a mimosa now. But for me, that cost, because we had a couple of people on the road object to the alcohol license, even though I only wanted it for a few daytime mimosas or Bloody Marys. So I then had to go to the local council and pay for someone to represent me, which cost £1,000, which in those days I didn't have £1,000 was not so easy. Pay for someone. They put together, you know, a big case for me, and in the end we won. But as you said, nothing is that simple. I think in a lot of businesses too, but it's not that simple. So for you to say that you love to get Bloody Mary, I love that, because it means that was worth my time.
Yes, it was.
Grand.
It was. And I've mentioned a couple of times now that you have sold Urban Pantry to a really lovely lady, Crystal. What actually led you to make that decision?
I spent the third lockdown in Barbados because I couldn't deal with not doing anything again, and we really didn't function very well as a takeaway. It's much more a sit-in, like a community-based place. So I closed down in all 3 of the lockdowns, luckily with help from the government, and then sent a load of emails out to any areas that were still having tourists at the time, and said, I'm a chef and I'm a restaurant owner. I think I'm quite good at what I do. Do you want any help? And then someone that I know knows someone that knows someone that owns 4 hotels in Barbados, and sent my email to them, and I ended up going to work for them, and we got on really well. They're opening a new beach bar restaurant in Barbados, and by the end of my time there, they said, we want you to come sell your business, come and run it for us, you know, we'll give you a very good deal. So I pretty much said, yes, when can I? And I put Urban Pantry on the market, and then sold it a few months later. So I really love it. It will forever be my, you know, it's kind of like your first car, you know, they're always going to have a real soft spot for it. But I was ready to move.
Yeah.
And I feel really happy with that step, and I'm really happy for the new guys, and they're doing amazingly with it. And I like that I can still be a part of that and pop in, and it's not weird at all. So it's all worked out really well, touch wood. Now all I need to do is get to the Caribbean.
And me too. So it's worked out really well for me, Kate. Thank you very much.
Well, I did it, babes.
Yeah, thank you. I know. Well, it's been really lovely chatting to you. And I think that's going to
Having
provide a
me.
lot of very insightful information for startups, but also I think people that are a few years in. And you know, you've mentioned that actually it took you to maybe the end of year 3 or in year 4 to see that plus. And I think sometimes people just need to have a bit of a reality check on the behind the scenes of businesses. Because as I said earlier, it was sort of surprising for me. I just saw, for a lot of it anyway, a really strong, happy businesswoman, and actually there was a lot of stuff that you loved and really enjoyed, but also a lot of things that you found quite challenging. So I think it's been really interesting just to hear and to get your perspective on it, and I'm very excited for your next steps in Barbados, mainly for myself.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Kate. Take care. Ta-ra.